In the Great Storm of World War II, there existed a unit that fought without firing a single bullet. They were called the Ghost Army, a small American unit whose greatest weapon was imagination. Their mission was deception, to make the enemy see what did not exist, and fear what was never there. Composed of artists, sound engineers, and designers, this secret group used creativity as a form of warfare. They designed inflatable Sherman tanks that looked real from the sky, built dummy artillery positions, and recorded the roaring engines of armored divisions. At night, they moved silently across the French countryside, setting up fake camps and spreading false radio chatter. When German planes flew overhead, they saw what they were meant to see: thousands of men, hundreds of vehicles, a powerful army preparing for attack. But it was all air, rubber, and sound. The Ghost Army's operations began shortly after the Normandy landings in 1944. Their task was to confuse German intelligence and protect real Allied units advancing east. They built false bridges over rivers, created entire phantom divisions, and even simulated the movement of the famous Patton's Third Army to mislead Nazi commanders. The deception worked. German generals, convinced by aerial photos and intercepted radio signals, diverted their troops away from the real fronts. This saved thousands of Allied soldiers and allowed the push toward Paris and later the Rhine to continue with less resistance. Each mission demanded precision. Artists painted realistic shadows under fake tanks to trick reconnaissance aircraft. Engineers timed sound sequences to mimic convoys approaching from miles away. Radio operators spoke in coded patterns that mirrored genuine military networks. Every detail mattered, because one mistake could reveal the illusion, and yet, they succeeded again and again. Between 1944 and 1945, the Ghost Army carried out more than 20 deception missions across Europe. Their work shaped battles without a single direct engagement. They were ghosts in every sense, unseen, unheard, but always there. When the war ended, their existence remained classified for decades. No one knew their names. No one celebrated their victories. Their files were locked away, and their silence continued. Only in the 1990s did the truth begin to emerge. Historians uncovered the story of these creative soldiers, the artists who fought with ideas instead of bullets. The revelation stunned the world. The Ghost Army had become one of the most effective tools of psychological warfare in modern history. They proved that war is not only fought with strength, but with imagination. That illusion, when used wisely, can save real lives, and that sometimes, the most powerful army is the one the enemy never sees. The Ghost Army was officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. It consisted of just over 1,000 men, painters, sculptors, architects, radio experts, and sound engineers. Most were young, many straight out of art schools like Pratt Institute, Cooper Union, and Yale. Before the war, they painted landscapes and designed posters. In the war, they painted tanks and designed illusions. Their commanding officer, Colonel Harry Reeder, knew their value lay not in firepower but in imagination. He allowed them to think like artists, not soldiers. Their mission demanded creativity under pressure. They had to make deception look real, sound real, and even feel real. One of their main tactics was visual deception. Inflatable tanks, jeeps, and artillery pieces were made of rubberized fabric and could be carried by a few men. When inflated, they appeared solid and life-sized from the air. Entire fake armored divisions could be set up in a few hours. From above, German pilots saw columns of tanks and trucks where there were none. But the illusion didn't stop at visuals. The sonic deception team, led by engineers from Bell Laboratories, used huge speakers to project pre-recorded sounds of motor engines, troop movements, and construction. These sounds could be heard up to 15 miles away. Combined with fake radio traffic, the effect was complete. The enemy believed an entire army was on the move. Each Ghost Army mission combined all three elements: visual, sonic, and radio deception. The result was a carefully crafted lie that fooled even the best enemy intelligence. One German general later admitted that the Allies seemed to appear everywhere at once, an illusion partly created by these invisible warriors. Their most daring operations took place during the push into Germany. The Ghost Army staged a massive deception near the Rhine River to divert German artillery from the real crossing points. They built fake bridges, installed dummy guns, and filled the night air with the sounds of tanks moving toward a phantom target. It worked flawlessly. German forces concentrated fire on empty fields, allowing the real Allied divisions to cross elsewhere with minimal resistance. For the men of the Ghost Army, success meant no recognition. They couldn't talk about their missions, not even with other soldiers. Everything they did was secret. They wore no special insignia, and their reports were buried in classified archives. Many went home after the war without ever telling anyone what they had done. Some became famous artists later, like fashion designer Bill Blass and painter Els Kelly, yet their wartime service remained a mystery until years later, when the records were finally declassified. Historians realized how much these men had shaped the European campaign. They were proof that in war, creativity can save lives as surely as courage. The Ghost Army left no graves, no monuments, and no recorded battles. but their legacy lives on in every deception operation that came after them. From the Cold War to modern psychological warfare, they were the masters of illusion. The soldiers who fought a war of shadows, and though they never fired a shot, they changed the course of history. By the spring of the Ghost Army had already performed more than 20 large-scale deceptions across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. Their operations often took place only a few miles from the front, under real fire. They lived with the constant risk that their bluff could be exposed at any moment. If the enemy discovered that the tanks were inflatable, or the radio transmissions fake, the result would be disaster. Despite the danger, they continued. Each new mission pushed the limits of illusion. One of their most impressive achievements was Operation Vierzon, their final mission. Near the Rhine River, this operation was crucial to the Allies. Planned to cross into Germany and end the war. In late March 19, the real U.S. Ninth Army prepared to cross the Rhine at Wesel to protect them. The Ghost Army was ordered to simulate an entire armored division 15 miles to the south. Their task? Convince the Germans that the crossing would happen there. Within 48 hours, they transformed empty farmland into a fake war zone. Hundreds of rubber tanks and artillery pieces lined the fields. Trucks painted with false markings drove in endless loops to simulate troop movements. Radio operators filled the air with constant chatter, fake coordinates, fake requests, fake reports. The sonic team played recordings of engines, bulldozers, and pontoon bridge construction. The illusion was perfect. German scouts reported a major Allied force assembling. Artillery units were repositioned, and reinforcements were sent to the wrong area. Meanwhile, the real Ninth Army crossed the Rhine almost unopposed. Historians later estimated that the deception at Vierzon may have saved thousands of lives and shortened the war in Western Europe. It was the Ghost Army's masterpiece, a flawless fusion of art, sound, and strategy, but the cost was silence. The men of the Ghost Army couldn't claim credit, write memoirs, or even mention their existence. Their work was classified as top secret until 1985, for decades after the war, when the files were finally released. Historians and journalists began uncovering the incredible details of their operations. Interviews with surviving members revealed the creativity and courage behind the illusions. Many of these men had carried the secret all their lives, believing that no one would ever know what they had done. Bill Blass, who later became one of America's most famous fashion designers, once said that his experience in the Ghost Army taught him the power of appearance. For him and others, war had been a lesson in perception, how what you see can change what you believe. Ellsworth Kelly, who became a world-renowned artist, used his wartime skills of pattern, light, and structure in his post-war art. In their own ways, they continued to use the tools of deception, but now for beauty instead of survival. The Ghost Army was more than a military unit. It was a living experiment in human psychology, how art, sound, and misinformation could manipulate the mind of an enemy. Their success changed the way intelligence and strategy would be used in every future conflict. From the deserts of the Middle East to the cyber frontiers of the 21st century, the lessons of the Ghost Army endure. Sometimes, the greatest victories are won not by force, but by imagination. The origins of the Ghost Army trace back to the early years of the war, when deception became a vital tool for survival. Before the Americans formed their own unit, the British had already mastered the art of military illusion. Operations like Fortitude and Bodyguard used fake radio signals and dummy equipment to mislead German intelligence before D-Day. The American Ghost Army learned from these techniques and took them even further, combining engineering, sound technology, and visual design into one unified weapon. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, as it was officially named, was unique in every way. It was not a combat unit, yet it often operated within enemy artillery range. Its members were not trained soldiers, yet they faced the same dangers as frontline troops. Their mission was not to destroy, but to deceive, and deception, to succeed, had to be perfect. They were divided into 4 specialized groups. The 603rd, camouflage engineers handled visual deception. The inflatable tanks, fake artillery, and realistic camouflage. They were the artists who painted insignias on dummy vehicles and created fake unit patches to make the deception believable. The signal company special took care of radio deception, sending out false transmissions that mimicked the communications of real divisions. The 3132nd Sonic Company produced sound deception using recordings mixed in Hollywood studios to simulate entire armies moving across terrain. And finally, the Headquarters Company coordinated all efforts, ensuring that the illusion was seamless from air, land, and sound. To anyone watching from the outside, it was magic, but to those inside, it was a delicate operation built on science, timing, and nerves of steel. Every sound, every signal, every shadow had to fit perfectly. During one operation in Luxembourg, they were so close to the front that German artillery shells landed among their inflatable tanks. The men had to pretend nothing was wrong, continuing their act even as explosions shook the ground. One soldier later recalled, "We weren't supposed to exist, so we couldn't die officially." The Ghost Army's power came not from what it was, but from what it appeared to be. They understood human perception better than any general or strategist. They knew that fear and confusion could paralyze an army faster than bullets. If you could make the enemy believe he was outnumbered, you didn't need to fight him. He'd already lost in his mind. And that was the true genius of the Ghost Army. They fought on the battlefield of imagination, where reality itself could be shaped like clay. When the war ended, few people knew their name. Their records were sealed, their missions erased from official history. It would take decades for their contributions to be acknowledged. But within the intelligence community, their influence never disappeared. The methods pioneered by the Ghost Army, visual misdirection, radio simulation, and sonic warfare became the foundation for modern psychological operations. From the Cold War to the Gulf War, and even in cyber warfare today, their ideas continue to shape strategy. The Ghost Army proved that war could be fought not only with steel and blood, but with light, sound, and imagination. They showed that truth, in war, is often just another illusion, one crafted carefully and believed completely. After the Rhine deception, the Ghost Army's work began to fade into the background as Germany collapsed. Yet their impact on the war's final phase was undeniable. Commanders across the Allied front credited the unit with saving entire divisions from being encircled or annihilated. The power of illusion had altered the movement of real armies, changing the rhythm of history. But behind every illusion was exhaustion. The men of the Ghost Army lived in constant motion, setting up camps, inflating rubber tanks, building false bridges, dismantling it all before dawn, and moving again under secrecy. They slept little, carried no real weapons, and knew that if caught, they would be executed as spies, not treated as soldiers. Their courage lay in silence, not gunfire. As the Allied forces advanced into Germany, the Ghost Army continued to perform small-scale deceptions to protect advancing units. They faked convoy routes to hide supply lines, broadcasted false headquarters messages, and created visual distractions to draw artillery away from real targets. Even when the outcome of the war was clear, deception remained a shield that saved lives. In the final months of the war, the Ghost Army witnessed the destruction of cities, the collapse of Nazi Germany, and the liberation of concentration camps. Some of them recorded the ruins in sketches and photographs. For men who had turned illusion into art, the reality of war's aftermath was almost unbearable. When they returned home, they were forbidden to speak about what they had done. Families asked questions, but answers were vague. They were painters again, designers again, engineers again, but no one knew what kind of battlefield they had once shaped. Their service remained classified, buried beneath bureaucratic silence. It was not until the 1980s that the U.S. government began to release the files. What historians found was astonishing. Mission maps, sound recordings, design blueprints for fake vehicles, and photographs of the men laughing beside their inflatable tanks. The Ghost Army, once invisible, was finally coming into the light. Documentaries, museum exhibitions, and declassified military studies revealed the extent of their contribution. It became clear that these artists had changed the very concept of warfare. The line between combat and creativity had blurred, proving that intellect could be as decisive as force. Even generals who never knew the unit existed later admitted that deception had been one of the Allies' strongest weapons. The Ghost Army didn't just confuse the enemy, they taught the military a lesson in perception, that the mind can be the battlefield, and belief can be the decisive victory. Many of the surviving members were old men by the time the recognition came. Some received medals, others attended small ceremonies, but most simply smiled and said little. For them, the honor had never been about fame. Their satisfaction was knowing that their illusions had saved real lives. Their legacy lives on in modern warfare, in the camouflage patterns soldiers wear, in the decoy tactics used by intelligence agencies, and in every operation that relies on misdirection instead of brute force. The Ghost Army remains a rare example of war fought without hatred. A war where the goal was not to kill, but to deceive. And in that deception, they found a strange kind of heroism, quiet, creative, and unseen. As history later revealed, the Ghost Army's operations were among the most classified projects of the entire war, rivaling even some atomic research in secrecy. Their work was hidden under layers of false documentation and generic unit names to ensure that no trace could be followed. Even their letters home were censored. They couldn't tell their families where they were or what they were doing. The entire existence of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was a secret inside a secret. Each mission they carried out required not only artistic skill but also military precision. The timing between sound recordings, visual setups, and radio broadcasts had to be synchronized to the minute. If a German reconnaissance plane arrived earlier than expected, or if a patrol stumbled upon the site before it was ready, the entire illusion could collapse. There was no room for error. Their base of operations constantly shifted, from Normandy's hedgerows to the forests of Luxembourg. From the frozen roads of the Ardennes to the shattered towns along the Rhine, they were always moving, always pretending. They had no fixed front line because their battlefield existed only in the enemy's imagination. Their work also demanded psychological strength. Pretending to be a powerful division while knowing you were unarmed required calm nerves and total trust in the deception. They had to act like confident soldiers while standing beside rubber tanks. They had to make noise when every instinct told them to stay quiet, and when real shells started falling, they had to keep up the illusion, even as fear set in. One soldier later described their mindset simply, "We were bait." They knew they were sent to attract attention, to draw fire, to make the enemy believe, but they accepted that risk. Their courage came not from aggression, but from faith in the illusion they created. Sometimes, the consequences were terrifyingly real. During one operation near the front, a small patrol of German soldiers approached their camp at night. The Ghost Army men had no real weapons, only blank ammunition and dummy equipment. But their deception was so convincing that the Germans turned back after hearing the false sounds of tanks moving and men shouting in the dark. The illusion had saved them again. The Ghost Army's success depended on understanding human perception, on how easily the mind connects sight, sound, and pattern into belief. Their commanders knew that the enemy didn't need to see clearly. They only needed to imagine correctly. That principle became the foundation of psychological warfare doctrine long after the war ended. As technology advanced, new generations of soldiers learned from their methods, the use of radar decoys, false heat signatures, and electronic misinformation. In later wars, all descended from the same philosophy, that deception, when done perfectly, is indistinguishable from truth. In the decades after World War II, military strategists studied the Ghost Army's operations, not for nostalgia, but for science. They discovered that deception could be quantified, measured, and replicated. What began as art became doctrine. What started as illusion became strategy. The Ghost Army had proven that in modern warfare, appearance could outweigh reality, and that sometimes the power to deceive was more valuable than the power to destroy. As the war moved toward its inevitable conclusion, the Ghost Army stood as a symbol of how creativity could shape destiny. Their final missions, carried out in the spring of 1945, were both daring and deeply human. While other divisions advanced under fire, the Ghost Army maneuvered in the shadows, preparing the stage for victory. When American forces crossed into Germany, the landscape was chaos. Cities were bombed into ruins, bridges collapsed, and communication lines barely functioned. In this confusion, the Ghost Army became the architects of order through illusion. They created false command posts, moved decoy convoys through the night, and kept the illusion of strength alive even when the front was fragmented. They also encountered civilians, frightened German families fleeing the destruction, and liberated prisoners who struggled to believe the war was ending. For many Ghost Army members, it was the first time they saw the true face of what they had been fighting against. Their mission had always been deception, but now, they were surrounded by the undeniable truth of human suffering. Amid the ruins, they still carried out their duty. In one operation, they placed dummy artillery pieces along a ridge outside of a small German town. Within hours, German gunners began firing at the decoys. Real Allied units slipped through a nearby valley unnoticed. The deception worked perfectly, yet the men who built it felt no triumph, only exhaustion. For them, war had become theater, but the cost of the performance was measured in real lives. Every illusion that succeeded meant someone else didn't have to die, and that was enough. As Germany surrendered, the Ghost Army's final assignment was to simulate a full division to maintain the appearance of overwhelming Allied presence. Even after the enemy's defeat, deception remained useful, ensuring order, preventing rebellion, and protecting advancing troops from desperate resistance. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the Ghost Army quietly disbanded. There were no parades, no medals, no speeches. They packed up their rubber tanks, rolled up their camouflage nets, and vanished. For the world, they had never existed. The men went home carrying two realities, one visible, one secret. The visible reality was the peace that followed victory parades, celebrations, a return to normal life. The secret reality was the memory of what they had done, the nights of false engines roaring, the days spent painting shadows on fake artillery, the tension of fooling an enemy who could kill them at any moment. That secret would stay buried for 40 years. During that time, some of the Ghost Army veterans became famous artists, designers, and teachers. Their wartime lessons about light, sound, space, and perception shaped their art and their philosophy. The battlefield had been their classroom. In the museums and galleries of post-war America, echoes of their service could be seen. Abstract forms, controlled color, geometric precision, dot to the world. They were modern artists. Dot to themselves, they were still soldiers of illusion. When historians finally uncovered their story decades later, the public was stunned. The idea that a group of artists had helped win World War II through deception seemed unbelievable. Yet the evidence was there. Photos, maps, recordings, and testimonies. The Ghost Army's legacy became a testament to a rare kind of heroism, the courage to create rather than destroy, to deceive for the sake of life. They had proven that imagination could win wars, and that truth itself can be a weapon when shaped with purpose. When the story of the Ghost Army finally emerged in the late 20th century. It reshaped how historians and military experts understood warfare. Until then, deception had been viewed as a supporting tactic, a tool used to mislead or delay. But the Ghost Army proved that deception could be decisive. The release of declassified files in 1985 revealed hundreds of documents, detailing the planning, execution, and aftermath of their missions. For the first time, photographs of rubber tanks standing in open fields, fake bridges across rivers, and sound maps used for audio projection came to light. What had seemed like rumor or myth turned out to be one of the most innovative military operations ever conducted. Journalists and filmmakers began to track down the surviving veterans. Many were in their 60s or 70s, surprised that anyone even remembered. Some still carried the humor of their youth, joking about blowing up tanks with air, while others spoke with quiet pride about saving soldiers they would never meet. One veteran described his realization during the war. "We weren't fighting the Germans directly. We were fighting what they believed." That statement captured the essence of the Ghost Army. Their battlefield was psychological, not physical. They had turned art into a form of strategy, proving that creativity could change reality. The story also revealed a deeper truth about the human side of warfare. The Ghost Army blurred the line between destruction and imagination. In a world consumed by violence, they had found a way to fight that created rather than destroyed. Their work stood as a contradiction, an act of war that was also an act of preservation. Military institutions around the world studied their techniques. Modern deception operations, from radar spoofing and heat decoys to digital misinformation campaigns, can trace their roots back to the principles established by this small unit in the 1940s. Their success showed that control over perception could be as powerful as control over territory. In 2019, the United States Congress awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the nation's highest honors. It was a long-delayed recognition for their invisible service. Surviving members, now in their 90s, stood before the flag they had once served under and finally received public acknowledgement. For some, it was the first time their families heard the full truth of what they had done. The medal did more than honor them. It validated the idea that intellect, creativity, and illusion had a rightful place in the history of warfare. Their contribution was not just strategic but philosophical. It proved that victory doesn't always come from superior weapons or larger numbers, but from superior imagination. As historians reflected on their story, the Ghost Army came to symbolize a deeper message about humanity itself. That even in times of destruction, the human mind seeks creation. That art, sound, and invention, when guided by purpose, can defend life as surely as any rifle. Their war had been one of deception, but their legacy was truth. That in the darkest moments of history, imagination can still be a force for good. In the decades that followed the war, the lessons of the Ghost Army echoed quietly through military strategy, art, and even philosophy. Their story became a case study in how perception shapes reality, not just in battle, but in every field where information and belief intersect. At West Point and other military academies, their operations began to be analyzed as examples of cognitive warfare. Commanders studied how they constructed illusions, so complete that they rewired the enemy's assumptions. The Ghost Army didn't simply trick the Germans. They controlled their decision-making process. Every sound, every visual cue, every radio signal was crafted to guide enemy intelligence into reaching a false conclusion, willingly, logically, and convincingly. This approach redefined the psychology of conflict. It showed that victory was not only about destruction, but also about control of thought. To manipulate what an opponent perceives is to shape their actions before they happen. It was a form of predictive warfare, decades ahead of its time. In modern eras, this thinking evolved into digital deception and cyber warfare. The same principles used by the Ghost Army, mimicry, timing, illusion, now operate in computer systems, satellites, and online networks. The battlefields have changed, but the philosophy remains. Truth and illusion are still weapons, and the side that understands both wins the war of information. Beyond strategy, the Ghost Army left an unexpected cultural legacy. Many of its veterans returned to lives in art, design, and architecture, bringing with them a sharpened understanding of space, light, and perception. Their wartime experiences influenced the birth of post-war modernism, clean lines, bold contrasts, calculated simplicity. The same minds that fooled enemy generals began shaping museums, fashion, and public art across America. Ellsworth Kelly's color fields, Bill Blass's precision and fashion, and Arthur Singer's wildlife paintings all carried echoes of their wartime mastery of illusion. What they had learned under the pressure of deception, how the eye perceives, how light transforms, how form creates emotion, became tools of beauty rather than survival. The Ghost Army also became a symbol in art theory, a reminder of how creativity can survive even in humanity's darkest chapters. Their story blurred the boundaries between artist and soldier, between creation and defense, between truth and performance. Their existence challenged the idea that war must always be destruction. Instead, they proved that war could also be imagination, not to glorify violence, but to outthink it. Every deception they built carried a moral paradox. They lied to save lives. They faked battles so real that real soldiers could live to fight another day. They manipulated the truth so that fewer graves would be dug. In doing so, they revealed something profound about human nature, that even in war, the instinct to create and protect can rise above the instinct to destroy. The Ghost Army's legacy, therefore, is not just military. It's philosophical. It asks a timeless question. If deception can serve truth, can illusion become an instrument of morality? Perhaps that is why, even today, their story feels relevant. In an age where information itself is a battlefield, their experience stands as both a warning and an inspiration that the same tools that can save can also deceive, and that the responsibility to use them wisely remains with us all. The story of the Ghost Army closes, not with the thunder of victory, but with the quiet echo of truth finally uncovered. For decades, their names were absent from history books, their missions hidden in locked archives, their sacrifices unseen. But history has a way of revealing its ghosts, and when it did, the world discovered a new kind of hero. Unlike traditional soldiers, they didn't fight for glory or territory. They fought for illusion, an invisible front line where imagination was their shield and deception their weapon. Their courage was measured not by how many enemies they defeated, but by how many lives they saved through misdirection. When historians pieced together their records, a pattern emerged. Every time the Ghost Army appeared, real soldiers lived to fight another day. Every time they built a phantom division, the enemy hesitated, confused, misled, and in that hesitation, lives were spared. That was their victory, silent, unseen, but immense. Their operations had changed the outcome of battles. Their creativity had reshaped the science of warfare, and their moral vision, to fight deception with purpose, to wield illusion in defense of life, had left a legacy that reached far beyond the war itself. Today, the Ghost Army is remembered not just as a unit, but as an idea that art, intellect, and courage can coexist. That even in war, creation can triumph over destruction. In museums and history exhibits, their inflatable tanks stand as relics of a paradox, soft weapons that carried the weight of real war. Old film reels show young men laughing as they paint insignias on rubber vehicles, unaware that history would one day call them pioneers. The few surviving veterans, in their final years, spoke of their work with modest pride. They never saw themselves as heroes. They were artists doing their duty, engineers solving problems, dreamers helping soldiers survive. Yet their work redefined what heroism could mean. Because heroism isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes it's about creation. Sometimes it's about making the enemy believe a lie so that others can live in truth. The Ghost Army taught the world that deception, when guided by purpose, can serve humanity. That intelligence, imagination, and courage together can build something stronger than fear. As time passes, and the last witnesses fade, their story endures, a testament to the power of the human mind even in the face of chaos. They fought a war of illusion, and through that illusion, they revealed something deeply real about the human spirit. They were soldiers who painted shadows, sculpted fear, and gave shape to hope. And though their tanks were air and their divisions were smoke, their impact was solid as stone. They proved that even in the darkest war, humanity ever waged, the brightest weapon was imagination itself. That is the legacy of the Ghost Army, the invisible warriors of World War II.